So essentially what I wanted to get into is what it's like working with a narcissistic boss, but more importantly, the environment that allows for a narcissistic boss to actually have their position. And this is nepotism. This is, in a narcissistic work environment, the nepotism is where narcissists actually promote other narcissists, which seems, in my opinion, it seems that that would be illogical because a narcissist would want to be the center of attention. But apparently, narcissists do work together, as they are currently working together to harass me now, but do work together to promote one another, which doesn't really make perfect sense to me, but that does seem to be what happened at least my workplace. And one of the greatest examples is about 3 months after I was working at this place. As I said, I had a work vehicle that I needed to I needed it to do my job because I worked in the field. Actually, it was more than 3 months. It was probably 6 months or 7 months or maybe even a year into working there. I was never told to keep the receipts for the when I paid for gas. Now, the head of the fleet and the head of maintenance, who probably wasn't very in depth because there were two gentlemen that worked at maintenance. One was related to the CEO of the not-for-profit, and the other is some scrawny little puke that looks like a reject from the Columbine massacre. He looks like one of the trench coat mafia type people, pencil neck, twerpy little bitch, that type of thing. And they actually had the audacity. Now, mind you, nobody ever told me to keep gas receipts, and nobody told my supervisor that I was to tell me to keep gas receipts. So she didn't know, my immediate supervisor. So she did not know because nobody told her. So then they come down and they tell me, well, if you don't give us those receipts, we're taking the car. And I'm like, okay, take the car. It's not my car, it's your car. I don't give a damn. I need the car to do my job, but okay, I can leave. I can find another job. It's not the end of the world. So what happened is when I got up to leave, the scrawny little puke got in my way, and I didn't push him out of the way. I stepped to the side, and I think I may have brushed up against him or something, but it doesn't matter. He didn't make a report. I did not purposely shove him or anything like that, but he's a little puke that majored in drama. He's not even this is the thing, though, that you see with these environments, these narcissistic environments. They will put people into positions that are completely they don't match their professional skills. They do not match their professional skills or their professional education, if they even have a professional education. And you will see this, and this is done through nepotism. And this is done through, I believe, an understanding of them realizing that as long as they stick together and they protect one another, which is what they do. I have this on the authority of many fellow coworkers. The only problem is many of my fellow coworkers, with good reason, because they don't want to happen to them what's happening to me, do not speak out. They just move on, and that's it. And they don't speak out. But I have people that have, I know people that have, two people at least, two women, that have received blatant and basically aggressive sexual harassment and reported it to Human Resources, and were both told, basically told, you're lying. This is how this place deals with sexual harassment. After we have to go through all these stupid sexual harassment trainings, mandated by the government, this is how they deal with sexual harassment. Okay, keep that in mind. I know of at least two women, not one, not none, but two, at least two, and I know of others that were sexually harassed that took advantage of the sexual harassment, the quid pro quo sexual harassment, to get more money and to secure their jobs. So I know women that utilized this quid pro, I guess it's not sexual harassment in that case, but it would be in any sane work environment, that would be considered sexual harassment. Okay? That's the truth. Now, I know of at least 2 women that received blatant sexual harassment, reported it to Human Resources, and were basically told, hey, you're making it up. So it's a culture. That's why I use the term rape culture. I think it's funny because this place is run by a bunch of limp-wristed, kooky, liberal scum. Okay? But yet they promote, and this is what you have to watch out for, the kooky liberal scum in society. The more they say they're against something, the more they're for it. You have to remember that. And that's what they're promoting. They're promoting an environment that promotes rape culture, or at least a culture that does not care about women being sexually harassed by men in the workplace, so long as those men meet a certain criteria that allow them to use them so that they don't get in trouble for violating affirmative action laws. So that's the gist of that. But the thing is, the narcissistic work environment, the reason there are so many narcissistic supervisors, and my immediate supervisor, I don't think she was a great supervisor, okay? Let me get that straight. I don't think she was a great supervisor, but she took a pay cut. This is what I'm going to explain this. She took a pay cut and left to be a therapist at another organization that isn't crazy because she just couldn't deal with working there. Now think about that. Think about that. A woman with children that was making very good money as a supervisor, I believe she was given the job due to affirmative action, but that's not the point. The point is, and I'll be flat out, she was not a mean-spirited person. She was a good-hearted person. She deserves to be a therapist, but she was not a good supervisor. But they put her in that position because of the color of her skin. Okay, and that's sad, and I think it's sad that she legitimately took a pay cut so that she could just be a therapist again and have a normal life again, where she wasn't getting yelled at constantly by our mutual supervisor, the one that's most likely harassing me right now. But think about that. When you have somebody that's in a position and their job is to be yelled at every day, that's the kind of people. And they do that to fulfill their affirmative action quota. That's the reason they do that. But the higher up people, it's a plantation. It is a plantation of stuck-up white liberals. And under those stuck-up white liberals are blacks that think that they are living it up. But unfortunately, they're being taken advantage of by these stuck-up white liberals to justify them having the place that they have, the not-for-profit, by making it appear as though they're a happy-go-lucky, super liberal work environment, and then it goes on and on. But the narcissistic culture goes beyond that. For example, there was one woman who is now, like, I gotta give her props. She's no longer on the board that I'm aware of, but she was on the board of three mental health agencies. Okay, 3. 2 of them I worked for. I was the employee of 2 of them. I worked at 2 different mental health places at once. Okay, so she was on the professional board because she was a therapist. But consider this: there's a professional board and a consumer board. Many of the consumers on the consumer board were receiving services right from the place that I worked. So you're receiving services from that place, and then you're on their consumer board. That doesn't seem like a conflict of interest. Okay, whatever. They had people on the professional board that were former employees of the place or current employees. Now, what's funny is I went to the senator's office about that, and the senator looked into it. You have to remember, senators are not magical people, and luckily it was a Republican senator, but they're not magical people. They don't just automatically know everything. But what they did know is, unfortunately, they took them about 2 or 3 days to get back to me. But what they explained to me was, this is not illegal, but it is extremely unethical. Extremely unethical. Not a little bit unethical, extremely unethical. And that's coming from the senator's office. So you have the ethics. There's no ethical boundaries, no professional boundaries, no semblance of a professional work environment. Certainly not a clinical health, a mental health environment. I I know of psychiatrists that work there that were threatened to have their careers destroyed if they left. I mean, it is a mess at that place, and it's a joke. It really is a joke. But this is the type of work environment fostered by a narcissistic leadership. And I think that this is obvious. This is also obvious under the Trump administration. I mean, I supported Trump. I supported Trump's election. But if you note, when he was elected in 2016, quickly I became aware that it's banana republic style. Okay. And that's the thing. It was a narcissistic work environment. And the narcissist delegates and delegates and delegates. So in a narcissistic work environment, it's a lot of delegation and nobody takes responsibility. Actually, my friend that unfortunately passed away from brain cancer, who worked there, what he explained to me is the problem with this place is nobody's in charge unless they're taking credit for something. If it's something they're taking credit for, then they're in charge. But other than that, nobody knows who's in charge because they delegated and delegated and delegated and delegated and delegated. And that's the whole thing, is they want to delegate away the responsibilities so that nobody knows who's in charge. So nobody's taking responsibility for anything unless they're at the bottom of the food chain. So essentially what one needs to take into consideration is what happens when something screws up. Well, that's when the old saying, everything rolls downhill. Well, that's what happens, is they take out whoever's at the bottom first. And I truly think that people that are currently working there should consider that, and should consider the morality of coming out against this place, calling the county, calling the state, calling the senator, okay, and explaining this is not a healthy work environment. Don't just go to another employer. That's one of the problems that happens, is people go and they just leave and they go to another employer where it's not crazy. It was funny, when I worked there, my supervisor said, stop telling me that these are problems only with this organization. Well, they are, because I have friends that are therapists and psychiatrists and case managers that have left here and have gone elsewhere to the three other major agencies in the region. And it's not crazy. They're not being harassed. They're not being threatened. They're not being intimidated. They're not being yelled at. I mean, one of the craziest things was when I first started working there, the gentleman that was, the one guy, he, as a friend of mine that worked at the other mental health place I was working at, told me, the dude's a fixture. He's a piece of furniture. He's totally part of the scenery there. But what happened was, there was a young lady that was in the stairwell. And I would take the stairwell. You know, you take the stairwell to cut out time when you're going to offices or whatever, when you have something to tell people, because you can't always get a hold of somebody on the phone. So sometimes you would, leave a post-it on their door or something like that. So I'm going up the stairwell, and there's this girl crying her eyes out. She's like 22, 21, something like that. I'm like, what happened? And then she goes, it's nothing, it's okay. And I'm like, well, let me give you my phone number, and you can call me after work, and we can talk about it. Turns out this lunatic is basically screaming at her until she cries. Then, about a week later, this is right after I started, about a week later, maybe 3 weeks into my employment there, I'm going through the break room, okay, and this same dude has a girl that's about 4'5", like maybe 5 feet, That's being generous at the size of this chick. Has her in the corner screaming at her until the point where she cries. Again, she's crying her eyes out. And then when I walk in, he walks out, and she's just there crying. So I go, what's going on here? And she didn't want to tell me anything, and, with good reason, because she wanted to protect her position at that employer. But ultimately, sooner or later, what people need to understand, therapists and clinicians and anyone that works there, is working at this employer is not good for the resume. It's not good for your emotional and physical well-being. It's just not good for you. And that's basically all for this video. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, there is an environment of narcissism, patriarchal abuse, quid pro quo sexual harassment. As far as we know, I mean, alcohol abuse in the employee restroom. There would seriously, now I never used the employee restroom because I'm not all la-ti-da like a lot of the people that work there. But the employee restroom, which is primarily used by women, most men just used the regular restroom, all three of us that work there. You have to remember, mental health is not a field where there are a lot of men employed. And if they are, they're a little, there's not a lot of straight heterosexual white men employed in mental health. But those of us that were, and even the bisexual and homosexual ones, we just use the regular public restroom because, why? Why bother using the work restroom? But regularly, the cleaning staff would find really rough alcohol, like the containers of really rough alcohol, stuff like Steel Reserve, Colt 45, Bud Ice, and a couple times I believe there was drug paraphernalia found in the employee restroom. My point is, when you have and I know of people that I'm not going to say who, but I know people that had to resort to drug use at work, not me, because I don't do drugs, but I do know of people that had to depend on drug use to get through the day at this employer, people that weren't necessarily on drugs, that went on drugs just to get through the day due to the way that this place runs you down emotionally, physically, etc., that had to rely on stimulants to make it through the day, just because of how terrible this employer is. And I mean, it's just so crazy. And that's what people need to understand, is you have to eventually weigh out the realistic nature. Is this worth my health? Is this worth my mental health? Is this worth my career? There was one young lady that worked there who unfortunately, you grow apart from people. But I mean, I'm sure she's cool with me because we're still connected on one of the social media sites, but we don't talk really any much. But what was happening is she was getting personally sued, or at least threatened to be personally sued, because she did not have a license. She was not a licensed therapist. She operated under the license of this organization. And her supervisor, who was also my supervisor, ain't none too bright, okay? And what happened was she was getting personally sued because our policy at this agency is to share everything with law enforcement and with what do you call it? It's an agreement that we make with the clients, I don't work there anymore, thank God. But we would make an agreement, and it says that if you're on parole or probation, we share everything with these people. Okay, if it's in your mental health record, it gets shared with your probation or parole officer or law enforcement or the court system, etc. That is an agreement that they sign when they receive services at this place. So she starts getting personally sued because of this place's policies. And then she asks her supervisor what to do, and he goes, I think what you're doing... Now, mind you, this dude was fruity as hell. I mean, he had a wife and kids, but I think that was a cover. He wore very, very pretty socks. I'll just put it that way. Very pretty socks that I think gave away perhaps there was more going on underneath of the scenes. Again, read the Satanic Bible. It's very enlightening to perversity and what people might be doing to satisfy their perversities. But he would wear very pretty thock. But, I mean, he didn't know what to tell her because he didn't care. He told her, I think what you're doing is pretty good. Well, she didn't know what she was doing. She wasn't licensed. She was a kid. She was only like 22. and she was going, I think she just about had her PsyD. A PsyD is it's basically the same as a PhD, except the difference between a PsyD and a PhD is a PsyD, you get the extra credits, the credits to get it, you get through actual clinical work, whereas a PhD is more research-based. A PsyD is based on clinical work, actually doing the dirty work. Actually, it's more clinically based, more mental health based. PhD, of course, you can use for psychology. You can use in there are many fields use psychology, security, national security, advertising. A psychology degree can be used in many ways apart from clinical work. A lot of people don't know that. So can a sociology degree and things. People don't understand that. A lot of it can be used in a research format. And it's not to say a PsyD can't do research, but their education is clinically oriented. If you were to go to a therapist that had a PhD or a PsyD for help, it would make sense, in my opinion, to go to a PsyD and not a PhD, because the PsyD actually did the dirty work. They understand people better through therapy. And like I said, there was a woman there that was probably in her 70s that they treated like dog crap. And she was grandfathered and she only had an associate's degree, but she was probably one of the best therapists there, where she actually got results, unlike most of the other therapists. And the reason why is because she had 40 or more years of experience doing therapy with people, actually getting to understand the way the human mind works through actually interacting with people, which ultimately is the only way to truly understand the human psyche, which is why so many of these people that are in this narcissistic clique, they can't understand the human psyche because they don't interact with sane people. They interact in their own little bubble. And that's all for this video.